Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for the really good turnout again, and all the people that are interested in this morning's topic. I'd like to just very quickly introduce our three speakers who will kick off the show, and then we'll open it to the floor and have some good discussion and debate. So Regina, Molly is going to start off. Regina is an Australian, lived in South Africa for quite some time. And I think if you listen to her last or to her presentation some weeks ago, you will be aware that she's a very competent lady who's worked extensively around the world, both in exploration, and that's really what she's going to talk about today, and then actual development of projects and mines. And she will focus on international stuff, also tell us why things work well in Australia, but also cover some of the challenges in South Africa that she has found in her work here. And then we've got Bill McKechnie, also a geologist. He's worked extensively in the diamond business in his earlier life with De Beers, and then subsequently in all the commodities in his time with Snowden, and done lots of good CPRs and that sort of compliance work. So Bill knows the industry really well. If you look at his background too, he was a very successful diamond explorer and did some tremendous work, I guess, through the 70s into the 80s, when localities or world-class mines like Phoenicia were found, and also discovered a number of other smaller deposits, including, for example, Dockawaya. And then, not to be left out of it, Adrian Reynolds, again, who doesn't need much introduction. Adrian is a very well-known geologist. He's worked extensively both in this country, where he started in the gold business, and then worked for Rand, or he was involved with Rand Gold Resources and setting up their developments and company in West Africa. So he's had a lot of West African experience, and then he's worked, since then he's worked internationally and in a large number of the world's major jurisdictions, including places like Canada. So he knows this business exceptionally well too. So the idea today is to have these three experts give us some of their views and background on the status of our South African, I guess, mining industry, since we don't have a long tradition of real proper exploration, but we'll get onto that. And then once we've done that, we'll throw it open to the floor. And just sort of a bit of background, there's been quite a lot of activity, credit to Regina, in terms of pulling up stats and information. Paul Miller's been there in the background and also fed a lot of stuff into the system. And the one sort of sad and scary point that comes out is, as Paul pointed out, and I think some of you attended his show last week, and he gave a really good talk, and I think Bill will use one of his diagrams today. But if you look at the JSE today, you have 40 listed companies, 7 who have no assets here, 24 who only have assets here, and then the balance have assets both here and elsewhere. And if I think back to my days when I started in this industry, and after I left De Beers, I had 18 months, 2 years as an analyst working for Huysama Stoltz at the time that ABN AMRO and all the big banks were coming here. When you got the morning newspaper or you went to your morning meeting, the board had more mining companies than other types of business entities listed on the JSE. So those days have sadly gone, and the question is, can we try and at least improve the situation and get back there? Anyway, maybe that's something Regina will pick up in the course of our discussion, or we can talk to as well. Anyway, so I'd like to start the program going, and Regina, let's over to you and get on with the show. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Just going to share my screen. Are we all good there? You can see the screen okay?
Yep.
All right. So today I want to share the context of mineral exploration and new mine development in a global context and competitivity, and then pull that in how, South Africa sits within that framework. Previously on this OGG group, I shared a presentation of the Australian mining industry, which is largely driven by the private sector and government collaboratively. And that joint partnership made it successful. Evolution of that industry has occurred over my career of 26 years. And I've been working in this space for a long time. So watch that if you want to learn more directly about key levers. In terms of mineral exploration, I repeat this always, it is the highest risk investment industry. For me, military is the only highest risk because it deals with the loss of life. And because exploration is so high risk, it needs to have a very high level of collaboration and transparency. And that is throughout the entire mine value chain. And this is evident in the new ESG world that we live in today. And that's the expectation from shareholders and society. So we exploration geologists, we have mapped out the mineral trains of the globe. We basically have a very good understanding of where minerals are on the earth and the type of mineralization styles that are the most economic. And that has rapidly changed in the last 20 years. So we have predicted in my career the multi-decade resources and mine lives using computing and sophisticated software. 25 years ago in Australia, a mine life for gold of 5 years was considered fantastic. Today, 20, 30-year mine lives are being sought after for investment. So we have more minerals defined now than ever in the past. And because of these factors, exploration investment and mine development funding is globally competitive. This slide here shows global financing. This is Q2, year 2020, this year, the year of COVID, and it's sourced from the Mineral Intelligence report. In terms of jurisdictions, Africa is the 5th in terms of investment, behind Canada, Latin America, Australia, APAC and the Middle East. The regions with the largest metal endowment attract the most amount of funds, which is Latin America. And that's largely a copper story, as well as the free-flowing money of exchanges such as Canada with the TSX and the Australia with the ASX. So these stock exchanges know if they maintain financial competitiveness in their mining instruments, they will profit off financial instruments where these exchange controls are absent, namely Africa, APAC and the Middle East, Latin America, and in some degree Europe. The key point here is for South Africa, there is no reason why the JSE should not be the preferred bourse for Africa, as is the case with the banking industry in South Africa. You can transact capital gains tax on projects that don't even exist in your country if you offer the right exchange rate controls. And this is how Canada attracts the largest global funding. They have great taxation flow through share schemes. So in the future, an African country is going to wake up and they're going to target this market in Africa. So the question I asked today, why can't this be South Africa? The change needs to be around the current controls to attract capital into South Africa. And the benefit is the flow-throughs in mineral exploration and mine development, creating a sustainable mining industry for future generations to benefit. I'm going to refer some work from Minex Consulting by Richard Shoddy in Melbourne. He's an economic geologist that I've known for some time. This graph shows how mineral discovery over time on a global basis since 1900 per commodity classification. You can see gold in yellow, uranium in red, base metals in green, other and the bulk commodities in orange. The majority of discoveries are gold and base metals if you look at the numbers on this graph. And there's a recent decline in global discoveries, which has been driven by lower expenditure and higher unit cost discoveries. So we know South Africa is competing for these global exploration and mining funds. The mining industry in recent years is struggling to attract funding against other industries. And this is evident with the pressure of dividends on large mining companies are under. They're more judged by their dividend than they are by their share price increase and their capital values over time. So government management of the mining industry and legislation is now being compared per jurisdiction by investors. So there is now a greater focus on fiscal stability, performance, and competitivity to ensure mining funds flow to where they are treated best. So country competitivity is becoming increasingly important, and understanding where you are in that spectrum, even more important for investment in exploration and mine development. Also note on this graph, the unreported discoveries are private companies. More recently, high wealth individuals and companies are choosing to go private instead of remaining public listed because some of the ESG requirements, particularly on stock exchanges. This next graph shows a number of global discoveries in blue from 1900 to year 2020. Overlaying with the exploration expenditures in the red line is exploration expenditures since about 1975. Note the efficiency of mineral discoveries on a global basis between the 1975 and the start of the mining boom, which is around 2003. This was a period where surface outcropping mineral discoveries were made, providing enormous benefit and returns to society. Note the cost of mineral exploration increasing from 2003 to 2005 during the mining boom has not led to more discoveries. As a result, the industry is now under pressure because it's not delivering the same amount of success as it had in the past, largely because most of the very large at-surface mines have been discovered. And we're now in a concealed exploration phase to replace our future resources. So we're currently experiencing this step change where data is driving mineral discoveries, particularly geophysics, in search of concealed deposits with new terrains. And also the collective data generated by prior explorers being available and ready to use to plan future programs. This is a slide from Geoscientists Australia. It's a measure of the exploration expenditure versus the drill meters. For the ASX, incidentally, is South Africa's largest country investor in the mining industry, followed by Canada and the UK. In comparison of these graphs, if we look on the left at the Australian dollar spend versus the drill meters since 2009, the government tracks these figures. It knows how much expenditure on the licenses and how many drill meters. Each of the mining jurisdictions is managed by the state, so this is a collective research by the national government. And on the right here, you can see the same being expenditure of a greenfield expenditure in green with drill meters and the same in the brown. If we look at this graph here, there's basically $2.3 billion spent for 10,000 drill meters. We can break that down and say, well, that's around $230 per drill meter. Then we can break down the right-hand side and look at the same for greenfields. It's costing around $263 per meter. And for brownfields being cheaper, of course, being $218 per meter. We don't have any of this information recorded in South Africa to see the state of health of the exploration industry. The second point I wanted to highlight that since the mining boom ended in 2013, you can see that the cost of expenditure and drill meters increasing and roughly about the same. But since 2013, with new innovations, drilling is getting cheaper over time. And you can see the gap difference here. So we are actually, as an industry, according to these graphs, becoming more efficient at exploring, trying to bring that cost curve down. This slide shows projects getting developed over time. So those mines in the dark blue here are the ones that are closed. You notice in recent times, since 2010, less mines are getting closed. In the teal, this is the operating mines. You'll also notice the operating mines are lesser number as well. And you can see the effect in orange. These are the projects in feasibility. And you can see the effect of the mining boom had on the industry. Enormous amount of cash injection into the exploration high-risk sector resulted in a shift change in the number of feasibility studies. We are, however, experiencing more projects not reaching development for 10 to 20 years. And this is due to environmental, regulatory, and commodity cycle reasons. So Africa is definitely the quickest continent to obtain a mining license approval. And Orion Minerals here in South Africa managed to get through the eye of the needle and obtain their approvals in 6 months. That's a remarkable achievement. However, having a mine footprint does assist a more efficient approval process. So this could definitely be a draw card for South Africa to focus and track its mine approvals to earn a reputation of engagement and efficient processing, while also maintaining its standards of environmental and community obligations. So looking at how the country approves its mines works with bringing those into production as quick as possible, because it does take 10 to 20 years to commission mines from the time at which they're discovered. This slide shows the discovery of primary gold deposits greater than 100,000 ounces since year 1900 to 2020. For me, I find this such a compelling slide with respect to South Africa and its gold endowment. It had such huge success between 1930 and 1950, an amazing performance in its time and truly remarkable. And for me, this really showcases how South Africa developed as a nation when you consider this alongside its endowment for diamonds and other minerals. But you can also see from this slide that between 1950 to now, not a lot of additional large, significant gold discoveries have been made. The resources are also deep. You look at the depth of cover here. And this does not suit favorably for modern investors who are seeking projects with good ESG factors and comparables to other projects. So the graph shows that there's also a limited number of at-surface gold deposit discoveries from year 2010 roughly. So you can see the era of geochemistry between 1970 to 1990, lots of surface gold deposits, but we appear to be at the end of that phase of exploration on a global basis. Yeah. So this slide shows that, sorry?
Are you watching time there as well?
Okay, this slide shows the mode of exploration method discovery in terms of the pie graph. So red is geophysics and geochem is brown here. Extrapolated mineralization is cream, and teal is the prospector discovery, and grey is the other. If we focus on Africa, it's largely a geochem and extrapolated known mineralization prospect discovery terrain. If you look at Canada and Australia, you'll note the difference in geophysics with 33% and 41%. So we're now in a climate, and those countries being most successful, one of these successful terrains for concealed deposit discoveries of Tier 1, 2 and 2 deposits. So countries now need to offer readily available geophysics data for the benefit of explorers to help de-risk their exploration programs. So geophysics is now key to the exploration industry, particularly for metalliferous type deposits. And metalliferous type deposits have the largest value, particularly polymetallics. So in terms of South Africa, how does South Africa want to fund its discovery of its future mines? You have two options. You can use South African funds to fund your future mine discoveries, or you can use international investors. Both of these have different merits, advantages and disadvantages. So in terms of international funds, how are you going to pull those levers beyond mining, cadastral and geology maps, which is the current focus? In terms of the MPRDA, it is nationalistic with 26 to 30% Black economic empowerment. And even with exploration permits having no empowerment, it still requires that empowerment to get the mine license approval. And projects don't have as much value until they obtain that approval. There are countries that have developed resources for the benefit of people and done extremely successfully. namely China, Russia, and Japan. And then there's other jurisdictions like Chile that tried to do it in the 1970s to 1990s and failed to do so. So the model for exploration funding needs to be considered, where the funds are coming from and how this fits within the legislation source of funding. So the reality, international high-risk exploration investors have great choice where to invest. However, they generally are capitalists, and they don't want to dilute their ownership down during the exploration to mine phase. On the other hand, international investors are the requests are fairly standard, really. They ask for a 20 to 25 year mine life. They want around 95% ownership, and they want to pay back to 3 to 5 years. So mining is extreme capitalism, particularly in high risk commodity cycles, which they bear the brunt of. So mining companies now are under pressure more than ever, particularly with dividends. So I feel in Africa, it's facing a conundrum of balancing international investment, but we want the profits to stay in the continent and benefit our society and future generations. Yet we can't afford the high risk exploration investment, where likelihood of success is very low. So the mining legislation needs to align the model of investment with local and international and build that model and sell it. In terms of, if I was Mr. Greedy Montash, what would I do with my background experience of exploration? I would definitely pursue the online mining cadastre, which is due for release in Q1 next year. That's fantastic. The second thing that I really like is mineral development agreements. They ring-fence projects to enable the economics to benefit societies and communities at large. They enable the project to move forward, because not all projects have the same economics, and they have a large ability to lift people. And that is why they exist in many African mine legislations. The second thing I would do is scan all the reports, make them available, the geochemistry, the historical reports, and the geophysics. I would put that on a platform and use crowdsourcing to use that data and let smarter people find the future deposits. There's so much technology and software available today for processing. You just cannot compete as a single entity. And then in terms of measurements of the industry, I would showcase South Africa's achievements off in terms of metrics and statistics. So report the exploration expenditure per category per quarter, report the drill meters per category, report also the geological unemployment trends, because exploration employs the largest number of geologists. When we have a large amount of geological unemployment, we know the industry is not getting invested. So it's an indirect relationship. I would also encourage Mr. Montash to follow the money. Which commodities make the most amount of money, and develop those projects in the boom commodity cycle. You cannot get capex for new mine startups in a trough of a commodity cycle. I also would love to see batteries made in South Africa. All the minerals are here, all the knowledge is here, the manufacturing is here, and that can serve society by putting battery solar into shacks across Africa. It's a huge opportunity. Moving on to Team South Africa. You know, Australia is extremely good at the private sector and the government showcasing what they have, selling what they have. And sometimes I feel South Africa's at loggerheads with each other. You know, create a one team, let's build this industry, showcase it to the world and attract investment into the country. The ninth point has been highlighted in terms of tax credits. And this is really how Canada and Australia have developed their industries, by having flow-through share schemes and tax credits for the ordinary mum and dad investors to invest in the mining industry. And then the 10th point I think is really, really important, to map out your life of mine resources that you have today, and how long do you have mining in place for? What are the shells of economic extraction for that? And then start to plan and build the next generation of miners. An example of...
Regina, let's leave it for there and leave the rest for discussion. We really want to keep the process moving if we can.
Yeah, this is the last slide.
Okay, good.
This here is basically looking at the global gold production. And you can see here in year 2020, we've reached peak gold. So we are now mining more gold than we're finding. And even if we crank up our exploration, it's highly unlikely we're going to replace our future gold ounces across the globe. So this is a sort of graph that I would suggest the government look at per commodity that they have in the country, and then map out how do we keep the sustainability within the country. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Lots to digest, but I'm sure we'll pick up on all of that as we go forward. Who's next?
John, I'm speaking next.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just got so many things open here, I'm not sure where I am. Right, okay.
That's about right. Thanks, Adrian.
Okay, can you all see the screen there?
Yeah, off you go.
Okay, so I'm going to talk just briefly about the South African mining industry, how it developed, and in particular, why a junior mining industry didn't develop. And then let's talk a little bit about what we can do about it. So discovery in South Africa, long before the arrival of the Dutch settlers, we had metalworking communities mining iron, copper, Okiep, Palabora, and Messina. Those were all discovered before Europeans arrived. The early Dutch settlers under Simon van der Stel traded with the native tribes at that stage for copper in the Namaqualand, which led to an excursion to Namaqualand by Simon van der Stel when he found the source of this copper. Nothing developed until the mid-1800s when copper mining started at Springbokfontein, now Springbok. We had coal mining start in Multino in the Eastern Cape in 1864, diamonds in 1867, gold in 1886, platinum in 1924. What's interesting to see is how these were discovered. The ancient metalworking communities discovered the pre-settler copper, iron, mica, so forth. The Kimberley mines, which started in the late 60s, early 70s, those were the entrepreneurs, Rhodes Bernato and their friends. Witwatersrand Basin was started by George Harrison, was found by George Harrison, who was basically a farmer turned prospector. Copper, lead, zinc in Achenhuis, Black Mountain area. Not sure who would be the first, but they were essentially prospectors. Thomas Cullinan discovered diamonds in the Pretoria area, which later became the premier diamond mine. He was essentially a bricklayer come prospector. Bushveld igneous complex, the PGMs in there and the base metals, original discovery by a farmer. Farmer also discovered the alluvial diamonds, Bakerville, Lichtenberg. The Venetia kimberlite, the first, let's say the first primary discovery by a major. And then Marsfontein kimberlite in the late 90s by Southern Era Canadian junior. Now, these are just phrased as the original discoverers. Most of the vits was probably discovered by geophysics. After we got off the Central Rand and the East Rand, where we had surface outcrops, then the Evander, Clarksdorp, Free State goldfields, those were all as a result of science, of geologists. But preliminary or primary discoveries tended to be by people who weren't geologists. Why is mining so important? I think you've all seen this slide and you've all seen the drop in both employment in this country and the contribution to GDP. And it's something that I believe we all feel we should be trying to reverse and make those graphs go up again. This slide also from John Bristow. On average, there are 50 to 60 mineral deposit discoveries each year in the Western world. 50 to 60% of these are by junior companies. And 55% of these, more than half, are gold discoveries. The role of the junior company then is very important. It represents pretty much a backbone to a healthy mining industry. Junior explorers and developers discover the new deposits, which then feed into the bigger mining system. They tend to be owned and operated by entrepreneurs. These are people whose own money is in it, who have raised the money for it. So there's real ownership there. They tend to be less risk averse than the big mining companies. And through JVs or through acquisition by the majors, that mineral endowment ends up actually being a mine. And the majors are required for that because they're going to provide the capital and all the resources for a big mine development. So a healthy mining industry requires that positive synergy between junior explorers and developers and the senior mining companies. It's not always a happy relationship. Sometimes either one side or the other side feels ripped off, but in general, it's worked, and it's worked particularly well in Canada and in Australia. Why haven't we developed a junior exploration mining sector in South Africa? You did hear recently from Paul Miller that there was a stage in the late, I guess, 2010 sort of time, where there were considerable companies, but they've dropped from the JSC in the intervening period. So why didn't we develop a strong junior sector? I believe it's because we had this major mining house system, and this mining house system did two things. It basically sucked up all the geologists and put them into a cradle to grave system. You could join as a geologist and you worked your way up the system from geologist to senior geologist to resident geologist to assistant consulting geologist to consulting geologist, and finally you made the top group consulting geologist. And the thought of it when I was in that system in the early 80s made me very, very tired. But anyway, as a result, the junior exploration sector didn't develop because geologists didn't need it. And I guess we weren't an entrepreneurial bunch back then. So we just sat back and looked forward to getting a Mercedes one day. The other thing the major mining house system did was to control all the land. So if you did want to go and explore, you didn't have a choice. The bushveld was pretty easy to explore, but JCI held most of it, and the other bits were held by Lonhro and by Gencor. So you couldn't get anywhere with that. That's the slide I referred to earlier, just showing at one stage where we had considerable amount of mining companies dropping off to the early 200s, increasing to 2000s, increasing to 2010, and since then a steady decline, something we really need to try and reverse. Canada, why is that so strong? Of listed mineral companies in Canada, there are 8 majors and 1,300 other listed mineral companies. When I've asked why that is, one of the explanations I've been given is that Canadian gambling is very strictly controlled. So you can't just gamble. As with buying, funnily enough, alcohol in Canada, it's very strictly controlled by the government and by the states. So the junior stock market has developed as a way of gambling. Everyone understands its high risks, but everyone's prepared to take a dip, put a little bit of extra money on and just watch a stock that they like the look of, and hope that they luck into a Bre-X early on and get out before everyone sees it's a scam. So that happens all the time. But more than that, the Canadian provinces actively compete with each other. So BC, British Columbia, competes against all the other states. So British Columbia makes sure that it's got good institutions, they're competent, the data is available, and transparency is there. You can see who's doing what and where. They have a use it or lose it policy. And if you don't return the data that you've collected when you drop the project, your chances of getting another mineral right are very slight. Then that flow through funding that was mentioned earlier, that provides significant financial incentives whereby, depending on when it is, instead of raising $10, because of the flow through funding, it's effectively $1.40 or $1.50 or whatever it is at the time. One of the other things we have to look at is South Africa not attracting juniors because there's a perception there's not much of significance to explore. You know, people look at it and think, well, you've been at it for 100 years, you've discovered everything, there's nothing else there. Let's just look at the first three. Let's look at Wits, let's look at the greenstone, and let's look at base metals. Graham Gavin talked to us a couple of weeks ago about the potential in the Free State in what was essentially called the Bothaville Gap, that Anglo-Vaal went in and did a fair amount of drilling. You've got the RSA project, 24 million tons at 10 grams a ton resource. The Sun project with a resource of 12 million ounces. These are significant big projects. They're deep and there are cost implications, but how much else could there be in that sort of area? White Rivers Exploration, a company I must admit I hadn't heard of, presented this at Junior Indaba last year. And this slide shows some of the ground that they've taken up. What they call the Kroonstad project, to the west of Vredefort, Klerksdorp South, Oribi, Bothaville, and something down here around Baiza. I don't know much about this, so I don't know how valid all of this is, but they're exploring this in their own right. They have a JV with Harmony over some of the areas. I presume that would be the Oribi area. There's 63% owned by Mark Creasy, who's an Australian mining entrepreneur. He has something like 40 to 50 different investments in different mining projects in Australia and throughout the world. So there is interest in this kind of thing. And I agree, we probably don't promote it well enough. Graham also showed us this one. This is, okay, believe it or not, there's the main Wits Basin. Here's what's called the Bethlehem Basin. Here's what's called the Colesberg Basin. There have been odd boreholes drilled in this, a few boreholes drilled in this, but you know, if this really exists, it's not a game changer, it's a country changer. It would be something amazing. So there's that potential there. All of these very difficult for small juniors without a lot of financing to explore. Deep drills, lots of work to be done. But look at the greenstone belts we still have here. Barberton Mountain Land, we're all aware of the very fertile endowment down there. There's been a lot of mining, but there's a lot more ground that hasn't been explored in the last 20 years in a more modern way. The same applies to the Murchison Belt, the Guiani Belt, Petersburg Belt, and Krypan. All of them have got existing mines or old mines on them. I do a bit of work in the Murchison Belt, and I could say one of the problems is there's a huge disconnect between the academic work that's done and the economic geology that's done. There is an interface. There are academics who get involved in the economic geology, and there's some economic geologists who have worked there that have an academic leaning, that want a scientific explanation for why the gold is there and where it is and so on. But you know, the mining history has led to Consmoda in the old days being staffed by geologists from the Wits mines and miners from the Wits mines, with the result that everything at Consmerch was dealt with like a Wits deposit. The ore zones are called reefs. And this is a very permeate or pervasive sort of attitude. Look, it's the same sort of stuff, it's just vertical. And that's obviously not the case. Moving on to copper, lead, zinc. This is courtesy of Gerard Mankies. You might have seen this presentation a couple of weeks ago. Enormous amount of mineral deposits in the area, and quite a lot known about it. He went so far as to pick up all the base metal occurrences. Some of them have been mines, some of them haven't. And very illustrative to me is the amount of base metal occurrences that have not been drilled. So they stick out on the surface, there's coloration or there's the mineralogy, but they haven't been drilled. Now, if some of you cast your memories back about 20, 30 years, who would have thought that Ireland would have one day become a major base metal producer, Europe's largest base metal producer, and one of the major zinc world producers? You know, base metals have been known in Ireland for a long time, but nothing has ever developed there until people got involved. And I was very impressed with Murray Hitzman's talk earlier, and the integration and the amount of deep geological thinking that's gone into there. And it's something I'm afraid we are still lacking in most of our deposits. They were easy to find, they were easy to exploit, and we haven't put this amount of effort into it. Going back to Gerard's slide here, that's what the area looks like. That's Ireland superimposed on top of that. Now, you know, how much do we need to explore to find something not similar, but, you know, something there? So just concluding, South Africa's mineral potential is undoubted. We have the geology, we have the people, many of whom at the moment are being trained with a diminishing chance of getting a job in the future. The major mining house system no longer exists. So can a junior sector develop? Can we reboot the South African exploration and mining industry through the development of a junior sector? And what do we need to do that? Well, I think we all know we need financing, either international or local, but we need to reduce the obstacles and increase land and data availability. Thank you for that.
Great, thanks, Adrian. Over to you, Bill.
Thanks, John. Just getting myself set up.
Yep.
The right screen.
There you go. Good stuff.
We're there. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. I might yawn a bit here. I've had a couple of late nights, so I apologize for that. It's not because I'm bored, but there's a lot going on. Sorry, it's not moving.
Might have to reload it, Bill.
Yeah, something gone wrong here. Excuse me.
Systems also had some late nights.
No, I had a problem. That's why it auto-saved last night, because there was a PowerPoint problem, and I don't know what's causing it. Sorry, I'm just trying to stop share. Share. Okay, is it there now?
Yeah, it's back.
Okay.
Yeah.
The left-hand side of the screen is a slide that I've taken from Paul Miller. I think it sets out the sort of relationship between geology, the regulatory environment, and what he described as the capital inflows. Capital flows, I guess, both directions, in terms of exploration and development, and out in terms of cash flows back to investors, to governments and employees. And we tend to forget in this investment game that when you really look at the numbers, governments are the group that benefits most from any mining venture, both in financial and lots of other terms. And I think that is not recognized very well in South Africa. And because of that, that's why you end up with a relationship between government and industry that is not conducive to working together. So I'll talk a little bit about the geological endowment as I see it, how it developed, the regulatory environment, and the capital flows. So on the right-hand side, we've got the exploration budgets that are reported by S&P Minerals for 2020. You can see over $8 billion worth of exploration money going into the globe, but only $77 million of that is coming to South Africa. Now, all of you, know South Africa well. You know the geology. This is very well endowed geologically. We've seen what Adrian had to present as well. So why are we only getting 77 million of the capital inflows in order to develop new projects? It can't be the geological endowment. It has to be the regulatory environment. There's nothing else about it. But the Fraser policy group say exploration investment decisions, and they say this has remained consistent for decades. Investment decision makers make their decisions 60% based on mineral potential and 40% on policy factors. So policy factors can be a negative factor. The fact that we're getting so little investment in South Africa leads me to the conclusion that our regulatory environment is so bad that that balance between mineral potential and policy factors is way down. Trying to change. Look at South African exploration budgets in context, and I loaded this off the S&P site last night, and it was a different picture to what I remembered. And there we see exploration expenditure on all minerals, all commodities, from 1997 through to 2020. And we see the big bulge starting off around 2003, dropping off 2008, picking up again to 2012. In the aftermath of the global economic crisis, and then the dollar's dropping down. But what we tend to look at is the percentage, and we need to look at this, the percentage that is coming to South Africa. And the big boom between 2003 to 2007 in dollar terms was really just a manifestation of us getting a bigger percentage of the available budgets. And that was the time when people were very much, still looking at South Africa reasonably favorably. Quite a large proportion of that was going into diamond exploration. But all of this just goes to show that exploration is a discretionary investment. There's intense competition for funds. We know that. And certainly more recently, you see a fall off in expenditure in general, international exploration expenditure, because we're in a time of crisis financially. And when you're in situations like that, short-term survival beats long-term growth every time. So less money into green fields, more into brown fields and mine site. It's extension of existing properties rather than going into new grassroots ventures. Exploration drivers. I've also been thinking a lot about what has driven exploration in this post-war period. And if one looks at gold, young people today won't remember that gold the standard price for an ounce of gold was $40 an ounce, less than that in the more distant past. So certainly in my view, one of the main drivers post-war for development of junior sectors in Australia and Canada were a couple of things. In 1971, unhinging gold from the US gold standard, $40 an ounce, and you can see how the gold price has taken off since then in various different ways. Lots of inflation, so you don't make the same sort of money out of it, but it had its effect. It made it more attractive. And then 1970s development of heap leaching technology. And that's, in my view, what really drove the strong junior exploration industry in Australia. I visited Australia in 1982. I was at Kalgoorlie. I went underground at the at the Golden Mile mine. I prospected all around Coolgardie. There were lots of defunct mines in that area. Tunnels underground, very small shafts, this sort of thing. I went back 5 years later and I couldn't believe the difference that had taken place in that 5-year period, where you had huge open pits. The Golden Mile underground mine didn't really exist anymore because there was a super pit developing. And so it went on. And around Coolgardie, big open pits developing and people exploiting them through a combination of gold leaching and heap leach technology. And then post-World War II, general global economic development drove the requirement for things like copper, iron ore, manganese, and other minerals. And certainly in Canada, there was already, and in the United States, a very strong sort of prospecting culture inculcated into certain parts of of those countries. And the reason that lots of people, well, not lots of people, but prospectors continued was this administrative efficiency. They knew what the rules were. They could get on with things and no one bothered them too much. And if they were successful, they would reap tremendous benefits of it. But again, it was post-1970s, the change in the gold price that drove lots of exploration, in my view. So if we look at South Africa, just forget about the distant past. We're in a situation now where, you know, we have the Mineral Resources and Petroleum Development Act, which has been, you know, not a great act right from the start. There have been lots of issues with it, with all the changes that have taken place over the period, over the period of time it's been in existence, and we'll maybe look at some of those. But if you look on the left-hand side, if you can read that, the preamble to the Act, and it describes itself to make provision for equitable access to and sustainable development of the nation's mineral and petroleum resources and to provide for matters connected therewith. And that's great, recognizing that minerals and petroleum are non-renewable natural resources. The Act starts off immediately with a negative statement about mineral resources and this development. They're non-renewable. Just because they're non-renewable doesn't mean that they don't have long-term potential. We already had a mining industry before this Act came into existence that was already almost 150 years old. And sure, some mines go out of existence if you are not able to maintain investment or they don't remain profitable. But if you have the right sort of policy set up, then if your country has a strong mineral endowment, then you can successfully continue to recycle those mineral rights, and new investors will come in. Because one thing that doesn't stand still is mineral commodity prices in the modern day. And there's always something new to happen. So again, if we just run through those various items there, you only start seeing anything that is really of interest to an investor until you get down to, you don't see it until you get to the last couple of points. So the second last one, reaffirming the state's commitment to guaranteeing security of tenure in respect of prospecting and mining operations. This has to be a joke, to be honest. It has to be. Emphasizing the need to create an internationally competitive and efficient, that's a joke, administrative and regulatory regime. And we know that those two last points are not being given the due consideration that they need, both by government and also by the people responsible for the administration of this Act and the regulation of the mineral industry in South Africa. So in 2002, we saw a change to state custodianship of all mineral rights. Not expropriation, we are told, but state custodianship of mineral rights for all the people of South Africa. It's effectively expropriation by every yardstick. There were transitional provisions between the old and the new, but it also meant that everyone who owned the mineral rights either had to reapply for it under the new legislation, or if you were an existing mining company, you had to reapply for the mining rights that you owned as a company or as an individual or as a group, a trust or whatever. And you had to go through a process of reapplication without any guarantee that the application would be successful. So in that process of reapplication, the right to prospect and mine vests in the state. So, that means the state effectively manages, administers, and owns, inverted commas, all mineral rights in South Africa. It's not commonly well known that the state already owned well more than 50% of the mineral rights in South Africa anyway, before this new act came in. But that wasn't a popular comment to make at the time. They brought in a use it or lose it policy, so to prevent hoarding of mineral rights. And the intention, we're told, was to create an investor-friendly policy. And we're having this series of meetings because certainly our perception, I think the perception of most of the people listening in here, is that we actually don't have an investor-friendly policy in this country at the moment. And this discussion is all about, well, how are we going to advise people so that that can be changed in the future? So the main problems I see with the current situation is the move from exploration to mining is not automatic for a start. Sure, there are no BEE rules for prospecting, but you discover something, then all of a sudden you have to find a partner. You need ministerial approval every step of the way. So first of all, the minister signs a prospecting permit. What absurdity is that? Why are ministers looking at prospecting permits? If you find something, then you have to convert it to a mining right. And there's a whole new process of ministerial approvals that you go through there as well. If you decide you want to get out of your business and you want to sell it to someone else, you have to get permission from the minister to do that as well. And so on. And then you have community commitments, the BEE charter, and lots of other things to consider. And to be honest, why are we even wondering why investors, are only prepared to put 1% of their annual exploration budgets into South Africa? I showed this slide previously, the 2019 Fraser survey results. On the right-hand side, the chart there shows where South Africa sits in terms of overall investment attractiveness. Not very attractive. The only reason we've got any investment is because of the fantastic mineral endowment that we have. Future opportunity, the lessons of history, the policy factors. I agree that policy is not the only factor. There will be other things at play, different perceptions of opportunity in South Africa. But the Minerals Act, and I'm just going to refer it to that because it's easier to say than MRPRD, because I keep getting the letters in the wrong order. It's about administration of the mineral industry in the country, administration of mineral rights, administration of exploration. You've got to make it quick. It's got to be as easy as possible. It has to be fair and transparent. And more importantly, the administrator's job is to make it work. There's a huge cost attached to acquiring licenses, even a prospecting license, if you can get that far. And the time factor, and time, as we all know, is money. And for most investors, most explorers, there are going to be easier places to go to. So we've got to get over this thing of administration versus gatekeeping. What's happening at the moment is gatekeeping, not administration of our minerals arrangement. Exploration success comes from doing actual exploration, whether it's greenfields, brownfields, or whatever. And one thing is for sure, if there's no exploration, there'll be no success and there'll be no future mines. And Paul Miller showed us last week, I think it was, of what the future looked like for us in 30, 40, 50 years' time if we didn't invest in new exploration. And making access easier improves the opportunity for success. That goes without saying. The things that bother me about the current setup is if you don't really understand why someone did something or is doing something, look at the consequences and then you infer the motivation. So why, nearly 20 years after we put a new Minerals Act into operation that is supposed to make things better, why is it that we have something that has actually made it worse? And there's no denying that. And for the ministry and the DMR to think about, we hear a lot about what they're going to do and what they say they're going to do. But what we see them doing and what they say they're doing are two different things. And in my corporate days, whenever we did strategic planning or whatever, this thing would always come up. You want to make things work. You either, if you can't change the people, you've got to change the people. And that's really the bottom line. And, you know, we are voters in this country. We don't have much of a voice, but, you know, a few people can make a lot of noise if we're prepared to do it. And it really is time, if we're going to make exploration work in South Africa, that we do see some changes for the future. Yeah, I think that's it. I just leave it at this: South African mining revenue, 2003 to 2019. In rand terms, it looks fantastic. But just look at what's happened since 2012. You maybe see production increasing, the rand, the billions of rands more than previously the case, but they're worth less in international terms. And sooner or later, that's going to start running downhill in dollar terms.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Bill. Henny, are you there?
Yes, ready. People can
Okay.
put on their videos, but keep yourself muted.
Right, let's throw it open to the floor, and maybe Alan Side, we'll put you in the hot seat first. Just Alan, given your past experiences and your frustrations, you kick off the question and answer time, please. You have to unmute yourself.
Okay, John, is that working?
Yeah, perfect.
Is it on? Okay.
Yeah,
yeah, thanks everyone. That was really some good talks there. I think we all trying to convert the converted. I don't think there's any one of us in this meeting who don't agree with any of the things that have been said. Regina, two things there. You said the mining cadastre would be available in January. Well, if that happens, I'll eat my hat. I have many of them. I'll eat more. I don't see that being possible because I don't think they even know themselves who owns what. So that cannot work, firstly. Secondly, the reports, you say reports will be made available. The Council for Geoscience has been closed for the last 2 years. You can get absolutely no information out of them unless you are previously disadvantaged and you have a contact and you know someone on the inside. You won't get anything out of that. So that is a problem. The way I see it, yeah, so data and land availability won't become a factor for quite some time. As Bill said, policy factors, yes, obviously. And if we looked at the preamble of the Minerals Act, the need to promote local development and the commitment to reform, these two issues seem to be taking precedent I've been at various meetings where the whole issue was driven by, this is by the minister, not this minister, the previous one, but I don't think anything's changed, that it's time for local development, that the local people must develop the mineral resources. The colonials, you colonial guys, ex-colonials have raped our mineral resources for long enough. So it's time that our local people develop it themselves, and they're doing their best to keep local investment out of the picture. So they are actually discouraging, and I've experienced this over the years since we closed the Foreign Investors Mining Forum. They're actually discouraging foreign investment in this country so that they can develop the minerals themselves. And that's the way I see it. So unless you can change the attitude of government and stress the importance of foreign investment to them, and that you're not actually raping their minerals, that you are doing something to advance the mineral development, you're not going to get anywhere. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Alan. That's a fairly sobering comment, but I think many of us would agree with you. So people, I think we know how the system works. Either put your hands up or else just raise your voice and let's keep it moving. Who's next? Gerard.
John, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I got the wrong computer here. I might fade again. Just tell me if that happens.
No, you're sounding good.
I agree with all the previous speakers and all the points raised. I'm an early explorer. From my point of view, we haven't really discovered anything new in the last at least 50 years plus, even 100 years. We're just acting on previous discoveries, occurrences really, by prospectors. Geologists just expand the deposit and figure out the geology and expand it. To a large extent, even the Free State Goldfield was not, the discovery was made by majors in the geophysics, but it started off with prospectors seeing conglomerates. The problem is we're not doing exploration in this country. We are acting on previous known occurrences, and by the time you're looking for and getting funding, you already know there's a deposit, you already know what the potential is, and you have far advanced in moving it forward. You need somebody's beer money to actually make a discovery. You must have the passion. You must have people listening to your model, and you must have the freedom for about 18 months, 2 years to put all your troubles aside and focus on that. Then we will make new discoveries. There are new discoveries to be made, but we're not doing it the right way. There is no real funding in South Africa for early exploration, and never mind real greenfields exploration, and that is the problem. You must get on a plane and go and fetch it from overseas. And of course, South Africa is not the favor of the day in favor at the moment. For various reasons, I don't disagree with most of those reasons. My experiences with DMR in the past has been excellent, except for one office. The rest was really very efficient. It was me holding up my prospecting right applications. The rest of Africa has got fantastic potential. Again, funding for that is not so easy, but working and acting in most of the rest of Africa is much, much more onerous than operating in South Africa. That is my point from an exploration viewpoint.
Okay. Moitabito, are you going to, you had your hand up. Let's hear from you, please. Are you there? Okay.
Nick, you got your hand up?
So I heard a lot of stuff in this presentation and obviously in the previous presentation about the issues surrounding the DMR. And what I thought I'd bring to your attention, you may not be aware of it, but OTAR, which is the NGO, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, has decided to take this as one of their issues that they're going to try and resolve. And for the last 15 months, they've been attempting to cobble together a grouping of civil society. So OTAR has been looking at this as not just a mineral industry thing, but very much a civil society issue. Their standpoint is there should be no secrecy about mineral rights, and everybody who's potentially involved has been invited to join us. Now, it's not been easy going, but we've had one or two brand names join us, and we will, in very shortly, be putting a letter out to Wedi Mantashe, and then we'll be following it through with a PIA presentation in the beginning of the year. So a little bit like what Alan Saad said earlier, we don't think DMR is capable of auto-correcting. There is just no chance. So we're going to try and create another form of pressure which may or may not resolve in something more positive for South Africa than what we have at the moment. We've also engaged with the Minerals Council, and I must say, with a great deal of disappointment, we don't think they're the industry's champion, nor civil society's champion. So unfortunately, we've had to put them to one side. But this is a process that has started, and you'll probably hear that some of my comments here are reflecting what Paul Miller said. And we'll keep contact with you and tell you how it's going.
Interesting, thank you. Moitabiso, are you on? Are you going to talk to us?
Hello.
Hi there. Go ahead.
Sorry?
No. Our next speaker.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah,
Can
go
I
for
talk?
it.
Can I
Yeah,
talk,
please.
Don?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for everyone for the presentations. They were quite informative.
Tabedi, yeah. Hi, Tabedi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. No, I'm just saying I'd like to thank everyone who gave the presentation. The presentations were quite informative, and they really highlighted that we have got challenges in the country. And it's quite clear from some of those presentations that we need to address some issues. But what I'm picking up, and I think we need to have stakeholders, people who are really interested in this environment, to come together and speak in one way, and one voice, in one voice. For instance, what I'm saying, we've got a whole lot of people who have got interest in exploration. And there's no forum for those people to discuss their issues and formally present their issues to government. Maybe I'm wrong, there could be other developments which happened. Yes, we have got the Mineral Council, they're doing their job there, but they mainly represent large companies like the Anglos, the DBS, whatever. But I think there is a need for people who are interested in exploration to create their own forum. Maybe these discussions here and can form a base for that, so that government can be properly engaged by people who are out there doing the work, who are experiencing the problems. Large companies, when I look at it in South Africa, I mean, very few of them are putting any money or have got any interest in exploration. I was looking at DBS annual report the other day, and I thought they spent what they were going to spend, is it 30 million rands in exploration? something like that. I mean, I speak under correction, but I thought that is quite little. It's quite, I mean, we need more money to be spent in this environment. So, and you know, the issues which are highlighted here, they go back to the basics of attracting exploration investment. And, you know, people maybe should go back and read what James Otto, you remember James Otto? James Otto from the Colorado School of Mines. He did an excellent study some time ago for the United Nations where he came out with the criteria for attracting investment. And that hasn't changed, even if you can go back and look at it, especially the issues around the policy stability, policy certainty. And those are the issues I think we must go back and revisit them. But I would say really what is critical now is, as a way forward, I would propose that a forum be created to look at these issues. And if there are issues which needs to be addressed through government, then that forum can go forward and address them. People have raised the issue of access to data. It is critical, but then if there's no one who goes out and present the issues in a forum, you know, a properly constituted forum, we'll talk about these things in conferences, you know, we talk about them when we meet in our meetings, but I don't think there is a proper way or a proper forum which is addressing these issues. And I think maybe that should be looked at. And lastly, you know, we always look at the MPRDA, okay? And you say, oh, there are these problems in the MPRDA. Certainly, there's no perfect law, there are challenges. But the other day, I was just looking at the whole environment of mining, and I said, it's not only the NPRDA only. You must look at the entire regulatory framework of South Africa, okay? Look at what is happening in terms of NEMA. Have you followed all the developments in NEMA? I can tell you almost every 2-3 years, there's something coming out from NEMA. And it also affects the mining environment. So getting a prospecting right or a mining right on its own doesn't really solve your problems. Addressing issues around MPRDA alone, they don't solve your problems. There are many other legislations which are actually linked to this. You can't actually go and mine with a mining right these days. You must go through NEMA processes. They've got their own processes. And within NEMA itself, you'll have things like waste licenses which you must actually go and apply for. So there are whole lots of regulations which must be looked at if we want to look at the issues which are affecting exploration in the mining industry of South Africa. Thank you.
It's great stuff, Tabedi. So can we nominate you to be our chair or spokesman as a sort of starting point, and we this sort of junior exploration forum? I mean, it's interesting. It's something Regina has actually commented about, and we'll come back to that. Adrian, do you want to make a comment as the chair, as a follow-up? And then I also need Stephen Davey to tell us a bit more about things like NEMO, which is another huge challenge and layer of bureaucracy.
Yeah, and my comment goes back a little bit, though it does have implication to what we've just discussed. West Africa has been, for the last 20 years, one of the hotspots for discovering gold in the world. I was racking my brains to remember one single deposit that's been discovered by anybody but a junior. Mainly Canadian, Australian, and you could argue that Randgold Resources was South African when it started off there. And you know, yes, it's not easy working up there, but the government legislation was quite clear. It was written down clearly. You got a mining license if you did the exploration and produced a feasibility study with an environmental impact assessment, and you went ahead with it. And I don't know how many million ounces of gold have been discovered in in the last 20 years there, but it's absolutely enormous. So it was clear what you had to do in order to do it. It cost you more. You had to speak French and all this kind of thing. But it was simple and it was transparent. As time has gone along, the mining acts have been fiddled with a little bit there, generally to make them better. Every now and again, one of the countries has had a wobble and gone into this sort of resource nationalism, which we now see in Tanzania, which has probably killed Tanzanian exploration forever. But even in countries that have been, how can I say, over-bureaucratic or tending towards socialism, they've understood how important it is to get exploration going and have put into effect a framework that allows it to happen. And I sort of share some of the cynicism that some of the speakers have expressed, that the political agenda is far more important than the economic agenda in our government's eyes. And it's very, very difficult to know how to do anything about that. Yeah, that's all I have to say on it.
Yeah, very valid points, Adrian. Just flipping around a bit. Stephen, do you want to just comment a bit on the legislation, particularly things like NEMA? You work with it?
Yeah, well, everybody knows that when you load an application onto the SAMRAD system, it's actually a joint application. So it is the MPRDA application and the NEMA application. So you can't ignore the one that essentially both separate chapters in the same book. And the NEMA process actually is the process that takes more time than the MPRDA process. So one really has to pay very close attention to it. And it's probably a subject all on its own, but there's a common theme that I sort of picked up from the talks this morning and also from Paul Miller. And it actually just goes back to this business of sharing information, making information available, and transparency. And sort of going into the history, the NEMA was only promulgated in 1998, but the old National Botanical Institute and the Botanical Society kind of recognized the opportunity to really influence policy. And the National Botanical Institute would have been one of these old scientific ones, and they would have written reports and monographs all about different plants and so on and so forth. But they actually used the opportunity to change into the South African National Biodiversity Institute. And they decided that they're not going to be inward focused, they're going to be externally focused. We've got fantastic biodiversity in South Africa, fynbos, etc., and they got money from the Global Environmental Fund, I think GEF, and pretty much upgraded all the biodiversity information in South Africa. So now you can get the National Vegetation map. It's a huge book like the Geology of South Africa book, but you can get it for free online. You can get from the BGIS, you can get high quality biodiversity maps, botanical maps all over South Africa, free. And now this information has been provided to all the policymakers and decision makers, and it gets put into municipal spatial development plans, provincial planning and so forth, which means that they actually are using the biodiversity information for planning purposes. Now the Council for Geoscience went in the other direction, and they decided that international mining companies are desperate to come in here and they want to spend lots of money. And so they decided to wrap up all the information, and old geological maps that used to cost 10 Rand and then maybe 100 Rand suddenly cost 1,000 Rand, and nobody's buying maps. Surprise, surprise. Municipalities aren't using geological information in planning for municipalities. And so in a way, the geological community kind of ended up shooting itself in the foot by keeping all the information tight, whereas the biodiversity sector made it all available and for free. And I think that's sort of like the difference, and it's a challenge for the geological community in South Africa, is to explain what do we have and why is it important. The Geological Society of London has done a very good job on this. They put out publications like Geology for Society, explaining what are the uses of minerals, how they benefit society, how they benefit the country. And that's the type of thing that, you know, would maybe also help a little bit, because, you know, most geologists study geology because they like the natural environment. But the way it is at the moment, NEMA is completely dominated coming from the biological sector and the botanists, and they've mapped the country in what they call critical biodiversity areas, and it doesn't take really notice of the geology. And so now when you put in an application, you're almost at the back foot, because the geologist's information is not really out and freely available. You know, in England, you can log on to iGeology and you can have a look at the geology map of wherever you are on your cell phone. Whereas in South Africa, you can't do that. You know, so I think there's a lot of room for geologists to kind of promote what does geology do for the country and for society.
Yeah, no, Stephen, you hit a very sore point, and it's something we must pick on. I think, and I won't expand here, but I think we as geologists also have a big part to play with the demise of our industry. I think we've been very bad promoters, whatever you want to call it, agents for our own profession, and obviously, you know, that's a strong statement, but it goes all the way through to the CGS. And you know, Mintech and all these institutions we used to have, where it's actually, as you say, impossible to get decent information these days. And if I just look at the Cape Province or the Southwestern Cape, when you look around here, you know, we rely on critical water which comes out of the aquifers. All that work has been done by public or private enterprise. You know, if you look at we have a whole agriculture sector here, which is huge. It is all spread around the Bokkerveld, you know, be it the vineyards mostly, and the wheat fields, you know, so the whole sort of industry here on the Cape really relies a great deal on geological aspects and factors, and no one really knows about that. But anyway, that's something to come back to. But your points are really good, and I think again mirror in a sense what Tabedia has said, that we really need to, you know, stand up for ourselves and get a proper process going to really put exploration front and center in this country. Regina, just coming back to you, a couple of points, you know, on information availability and how it works in Aussie quickly.
Okay, I can't tell you how much countries now expect free data. When I engage, I try to bring Australian companies into South Africa continuously. They can't understand why the data is not for free. They can't understand why a geophysical survey flown in 1970 is still proprietary under an historical agreement. So if you go into like the West Australian system, there are millions of free multi-element geochemistry you can download on your internet, on your computer in an afternoon. There's thousands of airborne geophysical surveys, and there's probably even tens of thousands of ground geophysical surveys, all provided for free. So, you know, recently they've discovered a new district for nickel PGEs, not 70 kilometres north of Perth, called Julimar. That one province is going to produce billions of dollars for Australians. So even though the Council for Geoscience, you know, has that information, what they do with the data is very limited due to their resources of what the public could do with it. So data is now expected for free. Post it up and make it available. Alan, I wasn't saying it's going to happen. I'm saying if I was Minister Mantash, this is a very cheap motivation mechanism because the government doesn't have a lot of money right now. The only other thing I was going to say about Minerals Council, it does protect existing assets. It's not in the business of exploration. It's not a business of looking into the future. So Tambedi is so bang on. We don't have, and John said the geologists don't have a voice. We need an exploration group. We need to motivate and collectively speak for the junior sector and everyone else involved. Just in terms of South Africa, you know, to me, it's a very resource lazy country. It had such tremendous value of resources. You know, it's never had to work hard for those resources, and it's still living on those resources 50 years later. However, it does have to change. It does have to find new resources, you know, going forward. So looking at every scrap of data and information you can get to find concealed deposits, new terrains, and all that sort of thing. So yeah, for me, that's my closing comments, John.
Graham, thank you very much for your patience. You can now speak. Graham Gavee, are you still there? Can you hear me, Graham?
We lost them. Okay. Bill, going back to you.
I had a couple of comments. Just Alan spoke about the cadastre. He said he'll eat his hat if, or whatever he's going to eat if it's not ready, because it won't be ready in January. And he said, who owns what? Well, the fact of the matter is the state owns everything. All they have to show us, all they have to provide is a list of prospecting rights and mining rights. A simple Excel sheet will do. Industry will do it for them. It's not a problem, but they don't seem to have control even of that, because we see examples of people picking up prospecting rights on top of other people's mining rights. You know, that can't be allowed to happen. And that comes from a situation where, you know, a company is given a mining right and the big government refuses to countenance that if they've been given a right for copper, they can't have a right for cobalt or anything else that might turn up on that property. And that seems absurd. It's just not the way things should happen. You should have first right to prospect for anything else on the area that you've been given a mining right for, subject to proving feasibility, all the environmental stuff, everything that goes with it. But once you've been given a mining right on a place, I think it is absurd for it to be restricted in the way that it has. And then you end up with the situation we saw with Lonmin a few years ago, where an ex-director managed to make millions out of screwing Lonmin because they were recovering, you know, some base metals in their concentrate that didn't happen to be on their
Awesome.
mining rights.
Yeah.
I've got one other slide I just wanted to put on, just about the context, if I can find it. I had this one in originally, and it just, you know, Regina spoke about it. Now, South Africa has been lazy. Yes, you look at the unique geology and mineralization. The Wits gold, Bushveld PGMs, the kimberlite and the coastal diamonds, Griqualand West iron ore and manganese, and Transvaal and Natal coal fields. That's the superb geology and mineralization that everyone recognizes South Africa for. And I think what's interesting there is just about all of that was put on the table between 1869 and around take it to 1930, in the case of the coastal diamonds and the Bushveld PGMs. But because of the style of mineralization and the richness of those deposits, that's where the mining houses came from, because they came out of that because of the type of mines that can be developed, often on next to no information. We heard from I think Graham Gavine a couple of weeks ago. He said, well, one borehole would go down and a whole new mine would be developed on that. And then I think the historical mineral rights ownership scene has been given very bad press and a bad deal certainly happened during the 1990s and so on, made to be overcomplicated. And it's actually quite simple. It comes out of the Cape and Natal colonies having their particular systems, the pre-1910 Boer republics. And interesting facts are tribal ownership, so-called trust rights. And there were areas of tribal ownership where the mineral rights were never taken from those tribes until the MRPDA came into existence. People don't realize that. And it was a case of private and state rights under the Minerals Act of 1991. And what happened there was that state put itself in the position of a private individual, i.e. all state-owned mineral rights were held by the state, and they could be farmed out by the state to anyone who wanted to prospect on that land. It was relatively simple. It could be complicated because you had to go to the deeds office search to find out who owned what. But certainly in the time I was with De Beers and Anglo-American, we knew just about who owned every farm in the Transvaal. And I've seen the maps. And I still have access to a couple of them from some of the deals that we did with some of the other mining houses. But even those mineral rights also came out of the original prospecting done by farmers, by prospectors, and so on, who found things, negotiated deals with private landowners to take over mineral rights, and then sold them on to the large companies. And it was possible to do deals with large companies in order to access mineral rights. It just depended on how you dealt with it and who you dealt with, like most things in life. So there's a whole story attached to that. We could probably spend a month on that on our own.
That'll be another presentation for you,
yeah.
Bill.
Stefan wanted to say something?
Yeah, gentlemen, you've described the issues extremely clearly, but I think to some respect, you're actually dealing with fruit rather than dealing with a root. And what I'm going to say now is not necessarily politically correct, but political correctness never brought liberty and freedom. I think there's an issue really here, and that when you talk about political agendas, you talk about the desire by an elite to exercise control. And that is the issue that you're dealing with. Plus the fact we're dealing with many who have a cultural heritage. And this has nothing to do with color. This is to do with culture. We're a cultural heritage that is backward looking and rooted in a poverty mentality, which explains why you see so much of Africa that is backward, why it doesn't attract the investment and the development that it should. I think Africa has a tremendous ability to bring reform and bring creativity, but the ability to generate wealth, I believe, is something that's ultimately that is God-given. And when people tap into the correct moral and spiritual foundations behind these issues, they will tap into the ability to generate wealth. And I've seen examples of that overseas, like in places like Nunavut, where there's been spiritual and moral revival, and it's been followed by an incredible amount of development in the mineral sphere. That happened in Fiji, it's happened in parts of Colombia and other parts of the world. So we have to deal with the issues. I think the problem you are finding, and it's come across again, I'm reminded of the words that he who has ears to hear, let him hear. And people have ears, the people at the top have ears, but they're not hearing. And for that, a heart has to be changed. And for that, there needs to be a spiritual and moral revival. And I think if anybody you want to talk to me on a private level, I'm available to share more on those issues. But I think ultimately that has to take place. The suggestions that the speakers have come up with are brilliant, but out of the context of dealing with the root issues, which are the unseen forces that are acting upon leaders, you won't bring change. But change will come. And like I say, if people want to talk to me more about these on a personal level, I'm open to discussion.
Thank you, Graham. Can we hear you now? No, sorry, Graham, you are still dead in the
Graham,
water.
there's no sound coming out.
I can see your lips moving. I think you'll have to go out and log in again.
Okay, I'll do that.
There you go. No, we've got you. We got you. You just got on now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. No, just a couple of comments here. I think everyone has made some serious points. We know what to do. We know what the obstacles are. I think one point I want to make is ideology. We must look at the ideology of our government, the ANC, where they were mentored, where they learnt their tricks of the trade, and they've come in now and they don't recognize how the world has changed, how Africa has changed, and their thinking is still outdated. Let's go back to the days of socialism, communism. They like state control. They want to regulate everything. But let's come forward now to a couple of other points. I agree, Minerals Council we must keep away from. Tabedi says we need a forum, and I think that is very, very true. We need a public voice. We need to get our opinion out there. I find it very amusing at times when we have lawyers, accountants, mining engineers talking about exploration, guys from Deloitte. We need to drown out that interference. The other comment I want to make is the technical competence of the people in the DMR&E. And the one issue that I find very amusing in this part of the Free State, we've got a lot of Karoo cover. You see a prospecting right application put in, you have the interested and affected parties meeting, and then they give you the document and the mineral that are going to be prospected for, what I call the shotgun approach here. You start with gold, silver, uranium, pyrite, you skip through to PGMs, you skip through to kimberlite, you go through to copper, nickel, and then you end up with rare earths. You know, it is a bit of a joke. So you start questioning what is going on. And I think this is very much a problem that these guys from the minister downwards, through his directors general, the CGS, and the DMR&E, they don't understand the business of exploration. And I think we need to explain that to them before, hopefully we can get some meaningful change. Thank you.
Thank you. Fadzi, you wanted to say something? You can unmute yourself. Fadzi, you still there? Mr. Chairman, you can come in now and start summarizing.
Can you guys hear me now?
There we go. There we go. Fadzi, yeah, go ahead.
So the comment that I wanted to make, Graham has actually just made it now, to say that we seem to have a good understanding of the gaps that exist between the NEMA and the MPRDA legislation. But what is lacking would be the DMRE, because no one seems to come in and understand that there's a very big need to inject a lot of cash into the system, because we have statistics like Tabedi was talking about. They only put 30 million into the exploration in their financial statements. So how do we get them into the conversation is what my comment was about. So yeah, that was my comment.
Thank you very much. Adrian, sorry, Jock, before Adrian, before you come in, Jock.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Just to pick up on something that Graham picked up on, talked about just now. We talk a lot about the regulation and that, and yeah, there are problems with the regulation. I think what's as big or bigger issue is the ability of the DMR to actually process the stuff, to process the applications. There isn't enough infrastructure to do it properly. And what I've come across, over the last few years are
incredibly poor applications that should never have got past first base. For example, an iron ore application to the south of the Kruger Park near Komatipoort there, where the geological description was a cut and paste about Transvaal supergroup type iron ore, in a basement area. I mean, one of the farms that was applied for was the rocks there were Labomba rhyolites. And I had one just about 2 weeks ago. I was up in the Brits area. The farmers there on a carbonatite, and the farmers there had an application, posted, and they sent me a copy of the thing. And I thought it might be for rare earths, but the application was for manganese, limestone, PGE, and chrome. Okay, and all the farms applied for were underlain with Laboa granites. That should not go past the desk, the first desk in the thing. How does that get actually approved or even put out as a prospecting right? I think if they had enough people or enough expertise to process these things properly, I think a lot of the stuff that's taking a long time to get things through is because of the noise in the system, unnecessary noise. That stuff should be screened out. We can talk at another stage of maybe what the motivation is for some of these applications, but I think there's a problem with the processing and the ability to process some of these stuff, and the same thing impacts on the storage and trapping of information from exploration projects, be it the council or somewhere else. There's just not enough infrastructure in there. The old story, there are lots of regulations, but not very much justice, as it were.
Okay, and if I can just ask, where does Fatsi base? Why don't she send us her email, because we need to get people like you into this as well with Tabedi.
Fatsi, do you mean me?
Where are you a student, or where are you active?
I'm an environmentalist with the climate change, resilience, and infrastructure project.
Okay, why don't you send us your email or contact details? Great. Okay. Jock, just to finish off on your comment, the tragedy, and again, it's something we've talked about before. There's this little company in Cape Town called Spatial Dimension, which is now owned by Trimble. And I think everyone probably here is aware that, they have rolled out a cadastre system throughout Africa and other parts of the world, which works like a dream, made in South Africa. It's all young South Africans. A guy, Bill Feast, sort of put it together. He's the son-in-law of John Gurney's, but it's just a really remarkable system. And when you make the point you've just made, it just doesn't make sense that we still have this horrible, dysfunctional SAMRAD, and yet we have a world-class facility or package here in Cape Town, and it's like so much of our other business in this country. And I think the frustrating thing for me is we hear lots of talk, but where's the public-private partnership that even the president talks about? And why aren't we supporting our own local small business? And if you speak to Bill Feast, I mean, the first thing he would do is gladly, go and train people in all these DMR departments and make sure that they left, positive legacy if they could only get their system working in this country. So, those are the things too that we're bumping our head against. We hear a lot of good talk, but we don't see the follow through. And to me, one of the biggest sadnesses here is the fact that we don't have real functional private public partnership and really make it work. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty much like Boris Johnson's tracking app. Let's design something else. And one of my students, post students, was involved in that company, and I remember chatting to her at a First Thursday Club about 4 or 5 years ago. And they, at the time, were trying to get the DMR to pick it up, and they were just saying, no, they're working on their own ones.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. It works fantastically the rest of Africa.
Okay, start wrapping up. Penny, are you anyone for sort of final questions?
Our chairman has got his hand up. He's going to do the wrapping up for us, summarizing and telling us the way forward. On you go, Adrian.
Just before that, let's talk about the way forward. And following on from what Tabedi said, most of us on this call are a group of semi-retired people from the Western Cape. And, you know, I think we've had a great selection of talks this year, and this wraps it up quite nicely. But where do we take it from here? You know, I belong to the Geological Society of South Africa. I honestly don't get too much for it. And I sometimes wonder what they do. And I wonder how many of the committee are on this call. I don't actually think there are any. But they should be the ones that are pushing this. They should be the ones. Explorations, or geology is vital to exploration. Exploration is vital to geology. Why aren't they here? Why aren't they listening to us? There's a comment here from Jean. What is the role of the universities in this fiasco? Where are the economic geologists from the universities? So how do we take this forward? We've got to have, oh, thanks. Graham Gavin says he's on council. Well done, Graham. And you're one of the ones of a similar mind. So we've got you on our side, but where are the rest of the people that are just happy to, I don't know, talk about stratigraphy or little mollusks? You know, if we're going to get exploration going again, we've got to have one voice to do it. And to me, the Geological Society is the one that should be doing it. Graham, can you report back to them and just say, they've got a, you know, we've got 30 odd geologists on this call who all see the need to do something, and why can't the Geological Society actually do something about it?
Can I respond?
Yeah.
I'll do it quickly. I have tried on 2 or 3 occasions to draw the attention of the GSSA and MANCO to the problem we have in this country, right? From too many geologists graduating, to the fact that everyone talks about exploration, but there's no geological input. There seems to be a reluctance, and I don't know whether it's just a lethargy or political indifference. Quite frankly, right now, and this is just between this group, I think it's going to take quite a bit of effort for the Geological Society to get involved. Personally, I think we must lead the way and then hopefully bring the GSSA on board. I think that's, I don't want to say any more.
Adrian, I'll just make a comment. It's a society. It's not an economic understanding body. It's an educational body. So it's not addressing because it's not a good fit. You need a separate, as Tabedi said, industry voice collectively for exploration and junior mining.
Okay, that's fine. How do we set that up then?
I'll answer that.
Yep, please.
I think, you know, I've been having conversations on and off with Minerals Council, Roger Baxter. The next step is that I meet with him, I put all the cards on the table and say, let's take the exploration, addressing that with government outside, and you help support us. Get some funding, work if they will support that. If not, you're on your own. But, you know, when I started my career, the exploration mining group in Australia was a couple of geologists sitting around a bar on a Friday night having beers. And we just loved a stimulating conversation. And that has grown substantially in 25 years, that it now advises the national and the state and provincial level governments in Australia. So it's just the starting it, getting it happen, whether it's a council, chamber, group, you know, you need to think about that. And yes, you do need to bring diversity to the table. You need to bring age brackets, different parts of the mine value chain. So I think it's good timing. It needs to happen, and we need to look at it in 2021. We do need volunteers to come forward. But if you are going to have a collective voice, as Tim Betty said, the government cannot deal with fractionated, you know, different groups. And also when, you know, the court case went forward with Minerals Council last year, and the Minerals and the government department threw it back because they said, you are not representative of the entire mining industry, which they are not. So we can be that.
Yeah, Regina, I think you're spot on, and I think if we want real transformation in the industry too, and I mean we really need, you know, something different and a new organizational structure. We need more ladies, because, you know, you ladies, and we've seen it in South Africa, you know, really hold things together and keep our society going under great duress. So I think you know, all these ideas are great, and well done to Betty for sort of getting the ball rolling, and well done to Fatsy as well. We really look forward, and those are or you young people are the sort of people we need to drive this, and the rest of us will chip in and help. So back to you, Adrian. I think it's been a very useful engagement, and I'd just like to say many thanks to everyone for you know, the quality of the presentations through the year, and the way people have responded. It's been just outstanding, and I think rightly so, Adrian. We need to, and Regina, we need to take this forward. We mustn't just let it abate or fade away. That's my comment.
Yeah, thanks, John. And yeah, thanks to my fellow presenters and the other people talking. And yeah, Regina, let's do something. You know, but as John says, we must spread it more widely. And I'm sure some of us are willing to be part of it, but we need to spread it more widely and get a sort of wider representation. Yeah, that's all from me, unless anyone's got anything else. Henny, thanks very much for setting all of this up. And I guess we'll speak next year. And if any of you are traveling, go safe and so forth.
Thank you very much, Adrian. If I can maybe throw a last pebble in the pond here, and I think we've got the base here. We've got a sleeping agent in the, not quite sleeping, Graham Gavin in the council. We've got a crowd of people here that are similarly minded. We've got people representing in various aspects of industry. Let's start here. Let's form a group, call it something, and then engage with GSSA and then take it from there.
Fantastic. So Henny, you've got the nights that you can fill up with work now. I believe you keep busy in the day, but we'll keep you busy, you know, 18 hours a day.
Thank you very much, everybody. We'll be in touch via the normal medium for next year early. We'll probably kick off with, how soon in January, John?
Yeah, just let Stephen, have you got a hand up or you're just clapping? Okay, thanks for that. Right. Yeah, I've already sort of got some ideas, as you know, Henny, and I think obviously it's important that we don't let this die, so we need to, you know, drive it further. But we'll put out a little note just summarizing this, a short note, and then we'll sort of canvass ideas of how we go forward in the new year. I think we've got a good idea.
Thanks, and season's greetings.
Thanks, Henny, and thanks everyone.
Thanks all.
Thanks all.
Okay.
Bye.